Hello and welcome to this video tutorial brought to you by tastytudes.com. In this tutorial, I will be demonstrating how to create this neon text composition in Adobe Photoshop. In this tutorial, I will be demonstrating each step clearly and the techniques used to achieve the visual effects. Now, in this tutorial, there's going to be a lot to cover, and it's going to take a little while for me to clearly explain and demonstrate each step. Even though I've tried to make this as simple as possible, there are still quite a few techniques used here, so bear with me and I promise I will try and go through them all as quick as I can. This tutorial consists of three main sections. First, the brick wall texture in the background. Secondly, the neon typography London. And lastly, the calling typography beneath. To make it easy for you to get the most out of this tutorial, there is a clear timeline in the description, so if you wish to skip to a particular part at any time, you can navigate through the tutorial there. There is also a quick reference PDF, which can be downloaded for free. The link is in the description, and everything you need to follow along with this tutorial is contained within this PDF, such as the download links with all the free fonts used, the work documents, and all the specifications and properties of each effect applied and to what layer. So I suggest you download this if you plan on following along. And I must add that all the links in the PDF are also in the description of this video. Now, before I start, I'm going to do a quick project overview so you can see exactly what we will be creating and how. This should take a couple of minutes, so if you're not interested in this part, please skip ahead now. So let's take a look at the layers panel, and as you can see we have some layer folders here, and this has been set up to create a clean and organized work document. Let's start from the top. We have a group called London here, and if I drop down here we can see we have multiple other groups which contain each letter, and I'll be showing you how each letter is created individually and placed in this composition. I can drop down the folder here and we can see that this contains all the layers in order with all the effects applied. So let's just toggle the visibility of that. And below, again, we have the calling typography, and this has more folders with all the layers contained. And if I toggle the visibility of that, we have another layer, and this is called letter comp. And this is what we're going to use to compose the initial typography composition, so we can use this as a guide. Toggle that, and we have the wall folder, and in this we have multiple images with various layer blending modes and color properties applied to achieve this effect. Let's bring this back. As I mentioned earlier, each letter in the London neon text composition will be created individually in its own separate document, and there's a good reason for this. If I look at above, I've got some tabs open here of some documents I've created earlier. Let's look at this. This is the letter L, and we can see that we'll be going through this, and I'll be showing you about all the guides and how to create all the elements here. If we look in our layers panel, again we have a layer folder and some subgroups and all the layers applied. If you have the PDF, you will be able to see all of the effects applied. We are going to use a bunch of Photoshop effects, and we will be applying these to every letter. And also there is a brick wall texture which you can download, link in the description. And we will have a PSD document, and this is a quick reference, a color reference for all the colors used in our composition. So if you do download this and you do want to follow along, this is going to make it really easy for you to source the colors. Right then, so let's make a start. I'm just going to close down some of these tabs here, and we're going to start by creating a new document. Command N to create a new document, and I'm going to make it 42 by 30 centimeters and at a resolution of 150. And then I'm going to come over to my brick wall JPEG, and I'm going to press Command A to select all, and then I'm going to press Command C to copy, and I'm going to come back into my new document and press Command V to paste. And if the image is not quite big enough, I'm just going to press Command T, and I'm just going to scale this up a little bit just to fill our canvas there. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to quickly come over to my layers panel, just double click on that layer and call it Wall 1. Okay, then I'm going to focus on the layers panel. I'm going to click on the Wall 1 and right click and duplicate the layer. And I'm going to call this Wall 2. Okay, and then I'm quickly going to just simply come up to the top of the layers panel and click on our drop down menu here for the layer blending mode options, and I'm just going to hit multiply, and then I'm going to make sure that the wall is selected, Wall 2 layer is selected. I'm going to right click and duplicate this layer once again and call this Wall 3. Okay, now that's going to carry on the multiply blending mode, which was applied to layer 2, but this time I'm going to change the saturation of this layer. So with layer 3 selected, I'm going to press Command U to pull up my hue saturation panel, and I'm just going to focus on the saturation and just pull the toggle all the way to the left, and that will in theory change that image to grayscale. So let's bring Wall 1 and 2 back, and then I'm literally going to duplicate Wall 3 and call that Wall 4. And we are now building our layers to create a nice dark brick wall scene ready for our neon lights. But right now I'm not entirely happy with the darkness of this layer on the top. So at this point I can press Command L and bring up my levels, and I can tweak the toggles here. Let's pull this one from the left to the right, and again here we can see we can really push and tweak these until we can increase the darkness of these bricks there. Okay, and then if I want to go a little step further, I can duplicate this layer. So I'm going to come to layer 4, right click and duplicate layer. Okay, and there we have it. We've got a nice dark brick wall scene. Let's just quickly come back up to our layers panel. I'm going to name that Wall 5. And that is all the effects we need to create that nice dark brick wall. But lastly, I'm going to apply a vignette. If you don't know what that is, I'm about to show you. I'm going to press Command Shift N to create a new layer. And I'm going to call this Vignette Effect. Okay, and what I'm going to do is just come over to my menu and click on the paint bucket and make sure I have a black color selected, and I'm just going to fill the whole layer in black. Then I'm going to come over to my layers panel and I'm going to come to the bottom of my layers panel, and there'll be a series of icons at the bottom. Third from the left is add a opacity mask or a layer mask, so I'm going to click that once. And then we'll see two icons appear for that layer. To the left we have what represents the visual image, which is a solid black layer, and to the right is a representation of our opacity mask or layer mask. With that layer mask icon selected, I'm going to come over to my menu and grab the ellipse marquee tool. I'm just going to draw an ellipse like so on our black layer or layer mask layer. Then I'm going to come over and make sure that we still have the black color selected. I'm going to grab my paint bucket tool and just click on the inside, and what you'll see is that area disappears. We haven't exactly deleted it, we have just masked it out. I'm going to press Command D to deselect, and then I'm going to come to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and let's take a look at this, and we're just going to toggle it so we get a nice blur on our vignette there. So let's push that up a little, and in this case we're going to go for something around, let's go for something around 100. Okay, and if we want we can toggle the opacity of this layer. So let's come to our layer and click the right icon, and then let's change the opacity to around 80%. And there we go, we've got a nice vignette around our black bricks. And finally, with the top layer selected, I'm going to press Shift and select Wall 1, and that will select multiple layers. And then I'm going to press Command G, and that's going to group these layers. And I'm going to double click on the group name and simply call it Wall. And there we have it. There is our first step covered, our wall. And we are now ready to move on and create the text composition. First, I'm going to press Command R on the keyboard, and this is going to bring up our rulers. And I'm going to create two guides to help me. So I'm going to come over to the far left and click in the ruler area and just click and drag. And I'm going to place a ruler in the center and one from the top down. And place that one in the center, and there we have it. Then I'm going to press T on the keyboard, shortcut for the text tool, and I'm just going to click anywhere, and I'm going to type in London. And as you can see, the font is actually black at the moment, so I'm going to press Command A and change that to white. And at the moment, the font is currently Times New Roman. For this tutorial, we will be using Bebas for the London text. If you don't have this font, you can download it for free. The link is in the description. And with all the text selected, we are going to come up and change the size to around 255. And I'm going to come over to my menu and just click on the selection tool, the move tool, and that will deselect the text, and that will allow me to move the item around. If I press Command T, that'll bring up the free transform, but it also brings up these nice guides around the top, middle and bottom, and that's going to allow me to easily position my text in the center. Next up, we're going to create the text composition of the word below. So again, I'm going to press T on my keyboard to bring up the text tool, and I'm just going to click anywhere and type in calling. But this time we're going to use a different font. So by pressing Command A, I'm going to come up and select the font Alako. Again, if you don't have this font, you can download it for free. The link is in the description. And we're going to change the size of this font to 370. And we're going to do the same thing as earlier. We're going to come over to the menu and select the Move tool on the top. That's going to give us the freedom to move this item around. And this time, we're going to press Command T, and this is going to bring up Free Transform. And we're just going to rotate this text at an angle. And you can use your discretion here, but I'm just going to move it around to something a little bit like that for now. And again, I'm going to make sure that it's positioned in the middle and hit Enter. Now, once I'm happy with my text composition there, I can toggle the visibility of the guides there. Let's get rid of them for now. We don't need them anymore. And I'm going to come over to my layers panel, and with the top layer selected, I'm going to hold Shift on the keyboard and select the layer below and press Command G. And that's going to group these layers here. And I'm going to double click on that group and call it Text Comp. And that will be our text composition and our general guide on which we will build our neon typography. Now, in this part of the tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to create all the neon typography for the word London here, and we're going to create them all individually. It's just going to make it a lot easier to manage all the elements. So we're going to start by creating a new document. I'm going to press Command N, and we're going to start with the letter L. So I'm going to name this document, simply call it L, and I'm going to make it 8 centimeters by 12 centimeters, and we're going to use the same resolution as the main document, which is 150 dots per inch. So let's go with that. And here we have our new document. And to start with, I'm going to create a dark background in which to work on. So I'm going to press Command Shift N to create a new layer. Okay, I'm just going to come over and grab a black color there and just grab my paint bucket and just fill that layer. And then I'm going to come across to my layers panel and change the opacity to 80%. And I'm going to click off that, and I'm going to press V, which is the shortcut for my move tool. And then I'm just going to create some guides here, which are going to help me. So I'm going to come over to the left and just click in the margin and click and drag over and put one in the middle and drag one down from the top. And there we have our guides ready. Then I'm going to press T. I'm just going to click anywhere and I'm going to press L, and that will bring up a letter L, and we want to have the font Bebas. Luckily for me, we have used that last, so it's come up by default. I can press Command D, Enter, to deselect the text, and by pressing V, I can pull up my Move tool, and I can move this letter down into place. Actually, before I move it into place, I want the font size to be the same as it was in the main document. If I remember, it was 255, so pressing T, I'm just going to quickly select this text and double check the size, and there it is, it's 255, so I won't have to change the font here. So I'm just going to click on my Move tool, and by pressing Command T, I can bring up the free transform, but also I can bring up the guides, which I can see around the edges in the middle, and that's going to help me just align this text element in the dead center. Now, this letter as it is here is fine, but I want to make some tweaks. For example, I want to make the overall appearance of this character more bold. Unfortunately, in this case, I don't have a bold version of this font, but that won't pose too much of a problem, because I want to take this opportunity to show you a technique we can use to add boldness to a shape or object. First, I will need to rasterize this layer from a type object, so Photoshop will allow me to apply effects. This is easily done if we come over to the Layers panel and make sure our text layer or text object is selected. We can right click and scroll down to Rasterize Type. If we click that once, that will convert this type object into a normal layer object. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this layer, and I just want to color overlay this because you'll see why later, but this is going to help me out in a second. So I'm just going to color overlay, and I'm just going to choose a medium to light gray. Okay, and then I'm going to come up to my filter and come down to other, and I'm going to choose minimum. And if I just move this panel over, we can see that if we toggle this, we can increase the size of this object. That's what this filter does. It adds a sort of boldness to a shape. So I'm going to go with 5 because I click OK, and if I press undo, you can see that all I want to do is make it just subtly bolder in this case. Okay. Now, also what I want to make for this layer is a stroke. You might be familiar in Illustrator. If you draw a vector object, you can apply a stroke and a fill color. In Photoshop, we don't have the ability to add a stroke. You can add a stroke if you, for example, double click and add a stroke like so, but I actually want to create a separate layer as a stroke. And let me demonstrate this to you. So I'm going to right click on my object here. I'm going to duplicate the layer and click OK, and this time I'm going to come to filter and I'm going to come down to other and hit minimum again, but this time I'm going to change the radius to 10. Click OK. Now when I duplicated the layer, it carried over the effects from the previous layer, so I'm going to quickly double click on this layer and I'm going to come to color overlay and I'm going to change it from grey to white. Okay, then I'm going to come to the layer beneath, the first layer, which was the smaller layer, and I'm going to press W on my keyboard, and that's going to pull up my magic wand. I'm just going to select in the middle, and now you can see that I've made a selection of that layer beneath, and then I'm going to click on the layer above and just press delete. And I'm going to press Command D to deselect, and now you can see if I toggle the visibility of the layer beneath, I now have a stroke layer. So I'm going to name these layers. So if I double click here, I'm going to call this stroke, and I'm going to call the layer underneath, I'm going to call this okay, basically every time you double click on a layer you pull up the layer style, but you can also double click to rename. But in this case, it's not allowing me to rename the layer, so I'm going to have to literally come up to the top, hit layer, come to layer properties and rename the layer here. And this is going to be called solid. So now we've got two layers, solid and stroke. Excellent. So now we are ready to start applying some effects. But quickly, before we do that, I want to quickly jump back to my colors PSD, because this is going to be really useful for us to quickly select all the colors that we will need for the effects. So what I'm going to do is come over to the layers panel, and I've got a group here. I'm just going to drag this from this layer into the tab above and just drop it, and I'm going to put that in the top corner, and that will reside there for the time being, and this will be there to select the colors. So I'm just going to come to my layers panel. I'm just going to move this to the bottom so it doesn't interfere with my layer hierarchy, and we're going to make a start. I'm going to come to my solid layer and double click. Let's move this panel out of the way, and I'm going to come to color overlay, and I'm going to select on the color, move this panel down and move my color picker to the first color on the top, which will be a dark brown. Okay, nice and easy. Secondly, I'm going to come to my stroke and do the same. Double click on my stroke, color overlay, click on the color picker and select my dark brown from the top there. Okay, now I want to apply a subtle effect to the stroke layer here. Let's zoom in a little so we can see what's going on a little better. I'm going to come back to my stroke layer and double click. And this is totally up to you. You can use your discretion here, but I'm going to give you the properties I've used. I'm going to add a bevel and emboss to the stroke object on the outside. And I'm going to go for an inner bevel. And the technique I'm going to use is hard chisel. The depth I'm going to leave at 100. The direction will stay as up. And the size I'm going to change to 10. If I press shift, that'll just skip to the next property. And the softness, I'm going to use 10. And then I'm just going to come down and change the opacity of the highlight modes here. We'll leave it as screen and multiply, but I want to make the white a little bit more subtle. So I'm going to change that to around 45. And I'm going to change the opacity of the shadow mode to around 80. Okay. Next, I'm going to apply an effect to our solid layer. So I'm going to come back to that on our layers panel, and I'm going to double click. This time I'm going to come back to color overlay, but this time I'm actually just going to change it to the orange we have here. Click that, so I'm going to change it to an orange. But I'm going to add an inner glow, and I'm going to come over to the properties here to the right, and click on blend mode. I'm just going to hit normal. And I'm going to leave the opacity at 75. I'm going to leave the noise at 0. But this time I'm going to click on the color and come back to our dark brown in the top there. Click OK. And if we come down to the elements, we're going to change the choke to 11. And we're going to increase the size to about 55. And we're going to leave everything else the same. Okay, let's take a look at that. And that's looking just fine. Next, we want to start to add the strobe lights. So we're going to need to prepare for this. So before we do that, we need to add some more guides here. So I'm just going to zoom in slightly. And what we need to do is we need to add 3 guides in the middle. Let me show you. So I'm going to come across to the ruler. I'm going to press V to put up my move tool. Come across to the rulers on the side, and I'm just going to judge by eye on this one, and I'm going to drag a ruler guide into the center of the letter here. Then I'm going to drag another one and try and get it so it's in the center of that, like so. We're going to drag another one across, and there we are. So we have 3 guides coming down the middle of the letter, and if I just scroll down, I'm going to do the same for the bottom. So I'm going to come to the top and grab and drag a guide to the center, and then let's try and place one there, like so. And we're going to drag another one down. And as you can see, we've got a nice grid structure here. We're going to need to simulate that on the edges of our letter. So I'm going to add another guide. Just going to drag one around there and drag another one. And this will all become clear shortly why we're going to use so many guides. So I'm just going to scroll up again, create a guide just there. We're going to try and create them so they're about equidistant away. They're all about the same distance away from our stroke letter. And drag another one down and about there. So let's zoom out. We can see now that we've got some nice solid guides, and this is going to really help us when we come to drawing our strobe lights, which is exactly what I'm going to do next. Right, so to prepare for the strobe lights, I'm going to use the pen tool. So I'm going to use the pen tool to draw my strobe lights. Let me demonstrate. But I need to come over to my brush in the menu, click on the brush tool, and then I'm going to come up and click on the menu on the top, and I'm going to change it to a hard brush, a nice solid brush, no feather edge. And I'm going to change the size to 7. I'm just going to click off that, and I'm going to come down to my color and click on the black here, and I'm going to move the color picker up to my yellow, my bright yellow here in my color selection, and click OK. Then I'm going to press Command Shift N, and I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this strobe 1, because this will be the first strobe of 2, and I'm going to press P on the keyboard to pull up my pen tool, or you could just come to the menu and click the pen tool here. So let's zoom in and I'll show you what I'm about to do. And press P again to grab the pen tool. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to use these guides I've created. And as you can see, we've got some squares here, and I'm going to start off in the middle. So I'm going to click once here, and I'm going to scroll down, scroll all the way down here, and I'm going to click once where the center line of this guide here meets the line of the far left. I'm going to click once. Then I'm just going to judge with the eye and sort of click in the middle of this square here just once, another node, boom, and then I'm going to join it up like so to the next guide in the center, and I'm going to scroll up to the top, and I'm going to do the same. This time I'm just going to look for something in the center here which aligns with that one, click there, and click once in the center, and once again, roughly in line with the one parallel. And we're going to scroll down, and we are going to click another node here in parallel with the bottom one there, and click once. So now we've drawn a line, but before I do anything else, I'm going to come over to my menu, click and hold on the pen tool, and pull and select the convert anchor point tool, or the convert point tool, because I want to add some curvature to this line. So I'm going to click on the node and hold, and just pull out, and it'll snap to the guide. You'll see that'll snap nicely. Well, let's pull it out, and it'll snap. We want these two nodes to snap to the line, and if we're not happy with that, I can move it with the mouse keys there. So I'm going to just quickly scroll back up to the top, scroll up quickly, and do the same here. I'm going to click and drag the points out there to add some curve to the line, and then I'm going to come back and grab the pen tool. This time I'm going to move my mouse cursor over the line I've just drawn and right click, and if you're lucky, what you should have is an option to stroke path. So I'm going to click that once, and I'm going to make sure that I've got my brush tool selected, and I'm going to click OK. And let's just zoom out a little bit, and what I've done, let's toggle the visibility of our guides just for 1 second. We can see that I've applied a stroke to that line. So if I press P to bring up my pen tool and just press enter, that's going to make the line that we just drawn disappear. So that is how we're going to draw our strobes. Now I need to come down and I need to just zoom in because I need to create the strobes for this part of the letter. I'm going to bring back the visibility of the guides here, and I actually need to create one more guide, so I'm just going to quickly drag one in from the left because I need to bring one in here. That's going to make it easy. Here we go. I'm going to use the same effect as before, so I'm going to press P on my keyboard, but I must remember to create a new layer, so I'm going to press Command Shift N, and this one's going to be called Strobe 2. Okay, and with the pen tool I'm going to start to draw a new strobe. So I'm going to click in the middle of the square, and I'm going to come over and click in the middle here, and then click once there, once here, and come over, just going to click there and in the middle, parallel with that line there, with that node there, and again there and there. And we are going to right click and apply a stroke path. It should be the same as before, brush, okay. And that, whoops, actually that is wrong. I forgot to add the curve to my line, so let's quickly do that. I'm going to come over to my pen tool and come down to convert point tool and just move my mouse cursor over the point there and drag out the nodes. Add some curve to the line there. It's not quite center. Should do it. I just moved that with the arrow keys on the keyboard. So let's drag this out. And let's grab the pen tool and let's apply the stroke to this. So right click, stroke path, okay, and there it is. I'm just going to press enter and that will make that line disappear. And let's again toggle the visibility of our guides and zoom out, and now we can see we have two strobes. Right, so in the layers panel I'm going to select the strobe 2, which is above strobe 1. I'm going to press shift on the keyboard and select the layer beneath, strobe 1. I'm going to press Command G, and that's going to group those layers. Double click on the group name and rename this to strobes. Okay, I'm just going to drag this group to the top so it's above the rest of the layers. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a glow, so beneath the strobe, so it makes it look like those strobes are glistening and reflecting light onto the backdrop. So I'm going to right click and duplicate this group. I'm just going to duplicate it, and right now it doesn't matter what it's named to, so well, I'll tell you what, let's call it strobes blur. I'm going to call it strobes blur, or maybe even strobes glow. That will be more appropriate. Okay, and then I'm going to press Command E, and that's going to flatten that group and merge those layers together so we've got a single layer. And this strobes glow layer is going to need to be underneath the strobes itself, so let's drag this underneath and that will be good there. Right, so let's zoom in a little bit, ever so slightly. Next, I'm going to come to my strobes glow and I'm going to apply a filter. I'm going to come down to blur and hit Gaussian blur, and I'm going to look for something around 7.6. Okay, as you can see, that has created a blur in the background, but that blurs, or that glow rather, is looking a little bit weak, so I want to intensify that glow. This layer is currently at 100%, so one trick is to right click on the layer and duplicate this layer. Okay, and let's duplicate it a couple of times. Okay, maybe once more. So we've duplicated that 4 times now, so we've got a really strong glow in the background. So let's come over to my layers panel and I'm going to click on the top strobes glow layer. By holding shift, I'm going to select the one on the bottom and press Command E, and that's just going to merge those layers into one. And I'm going to double click and bring up the layer style, click on the color overlay, select on the color picker, and I'm going to come over to my selections here and select this yellow. Okay, there we go. So we've got a nice yellow glow on the background. I'm just going to double click on this and rename it to strobes glow. Next, I'm going to create some detail, and I'm going to draw some elements, in this case the holes, and these holes are going to be set on the background, and this is going to create the illusion that the strobe lights are coming out of them. So I'm going to press Command Shift N, and I'm going to call this hole 1. Okay, and I'm going to come over to my menu and grab the circular marquee tool, and I'm going to press and hold Shift on the keyboard and just click and drag, and this is going to create a nice perfect circle for me. And I'm going to go with something like that, and I can move this circle into place by using the arrow keys, and I am going to just move across a second, and I'm going to grab my color picker here from the menu and select the dark brown from the color menu there, and I'm going to press G, which is a shortcut for paint bucket, and just fill that circle there. And I'm going to press Command D to deselect. I can move this around into a place I'm happy with. Okay, then I'm going to come over to my layers panel here and double click on this layer, and I'm going to apply a layer style in a shadow, and I'm going to keep the blend mode to multiply. I'm going to keep the opacity to 75, but I'm going to change the distance to about 3, and I'm going to change the size to about 3, so it's quite a subtle little effect there. Okay, let's zoom out. Let's have a look at that. That's looking okay. So I'm going to duplicate this circle a couple of times. And to do that really easy, if I press and hold Alt on the keyboard, and if I click with the left button on the mouse, just click and drag, I can really easily duplicate that object. So when I leave go, I can just use the arrow keys to move that into place. I'm going to do the same again. Alt on the keyboard, move up, and duplicate that layer. Alt on the keyboard, click and hold Alt, and click and drag, and move that circle into place. So now we have what looks like holes, so the strobe lights are emerging out of the backdrop, out of the grill, through these holes and coming up. If I come over to my layers panel here, you can see I've got a bunch of duplicated layers here. Well, what I can do to organize this is to select the top layer, holding Shift on the keyboard, I can click and select the first hole 1. I press Command G to group those layers and rename this folder to holes. If I want to be really pedantic about it, I can come and rename these layers, for example, layer hole 2, hole 3, and hole 4, if I really want to be pedantic about it. Okay, so those are the holes. Next, I'm going to add some more detail. This time, I'm going to add what look like clips that are holding up those strobe lights in the background. So I'm going to come in and zoom right in here. And I'm going to start by creating a new layer. Command Shift N, and I'm going to call this clip 1. Okay. Then I'm going to come over to my menu and select the elliptical marquee tool. And I'm going to click and drag and draw a relatively wide and thin elliptical selection like this. Then hopefully I should still have my dark brown selected, and I'm going to grab my paint bucket and fill that. Command D to deselect, and what we have here is this clip layer is below the strobe, so if I come over to my layers panel I can see that I need to click and drag this to the top. Make sure you don't drag it into the group, so it'll be on the top there. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Then I'm going to come over and grab the rectangular marquee tool, and I'm just going to trim off a little bit of this ellipse here. Click there and click there, so it looks like it's almost wrapping round. Let's zoom out a little bit, and we've got a nice, what looks like a nice clip there. Just before we move on, I'm going to double click on this clip and add a little bit of detail. I'm going to add a bevel and emboss to this, and we're going to have the inner bevel. We're going to make it smooth, and the depth is going to be, we're going to keep that 100, and we're going to change the size, well, keep the size to 5, and we're just going to change the highlight in slightly. Let's take the white down and increase the black just ever so slightly, really, just to add a little bit of detail to that. Okay, so with that we can start to move it around. I'm just going to use the arrow keys to move this clip up and down. If I hold shift, I can move it a little bit further each time. So with that, by pressing Alt on the keyboard and clicking on the left button on the mouse and clicking and dragging, I can quickly duplicate that layer like I did earlier with the whole layers. And I can use my discretion to where I'm going to put this. We're just going to add a few of these in. Let's do that again. Pressing Alt on the keyboard, let's just drag down here. Let's add a few down here. And let's add one more over here. Let's zoom out, see how that looks. It's looking okay. Same again, come to my layers panel, click on the top layer. By holding shift, select the bottom layer and press Command G to group this layer, and I'm going to rename this to clips. Next, I'm just going to add a little bit more detail, just to add a little bit more authenticism. Now next, I'm going to add a little bit more detail, just to make it look a little bit more authentic. This time, we're going to come back to the layers panel and we're going to focus on the strobes glow layer. So let's click on the strobes glow. This time, I'm going to come over to my menu and I'm going to grab the eraser tool, and I'm going to come up and I'm going to choose a feathered brush, and I'm going to change the size to 45, and I'm going to come over to the opacity and change the opacity to about 20%. Click off that, and I'm going to come over, and where the clips meet the strobe light, I'm just going to remove some of the glow from the background, because this is going to give it a little look like the clips are almost blocking the strobe light from fully reflecting onto the backdrop. So by just clicking multiple times, I can just slowly delete a little bit away of the strobe glow. I can do this as much as I choose, and that's looking pretty cool. Once you're happy with that, we are ready to move on to the final part, which are the highlights. And these highlights are going to be tinting the outer stroke here, just to give it a bit of an effect. To do this, let's zoom in a little bit. We're going to use the same technique we used to make the strobes here. I'm going to start by creating a new layer, Command Shift N, and I'm going to call this Highlight 1. And I'm going to grab before actually I do that, I need to prepare the brush. So I'm going to come over and click my brush, and I'm going to change the color to a white, a solid white. And I'm going to come up and I'm going to change the brush size to 2 pixels, and I'm going to choose a hard brush. Click off that. Then I'm going to press P to pull up my pen tool. Let's zoom right in. And I'm going to start by just selecting in there, clicking in the corner. Just clicking in the corner of the outer stroke. Click once there, and let's move down and click here. I'm going to create a line around the outside of our letter. So I can click there and there. Let's do this quick as I can. Click there and move up and join selection there. Let's zoom out quickly. Zoom out. And then grab the pen tool. And I'm going to right click. Oops, undo that. I'm going to right click and stroke path. Brush, yep. And click OK. And press enter. And as you can see, we now have a white line that is around the outside of our stroke. Okay, now what I can do next is come over to my layers panel and change the opacity to, well, in this case I'm going to change it to 80%. And then I'm going to come over and grab the eraser tool, and I'm going to change the opacity to around, let's change it to 100%, and let's change the stroke size to around, well, it doesn't matter because I can toggle the stroke size with buttons on the keyboard. Then I'm just going to come and start to delete some of the lines here. And again, I can use my discretion, but I want to just get rid of some of these lines, just feather the edges there, some of these lines. Just get rid of some of these, I can leave some in. Just little highlights on the metal exterior. And that should do it. That should be just fine, maybe less is more. And then we're going to do the same. I'm going to create a new layer, Command-Shift-N, and we're going to call this Highlight 2. But this time we're going to do the same again, but instead of the outside, we're going to do it on the inside. So I'm going to press P to bring up my pen tool. I'm just going to quickly click on the inside part of the stroke. Click there, and come up and click. Right click and stroke path. OK. Press Enter and let's zoom out. By pressing E, I can pull up my eraser tool. I can get rid of some of these lines. Let's get rid of some of these. Which ones we're going to keep? Let's keep some of the detail here. Let's keep some of this. I can toggle the brush size. Just get a different brush. I think that'll do nicely. And let's change the opacity of this layer to around 70%. We can play around with this. You can just have a play around, see what you like best. And we're going to group these. So we're going to come over, select the top layer, Shift, select, Command G, group that, and call this Highlights. And I'm going to drag this one to the top there. And we're almost done. We just need to do one more thing just to finish off this letter. First, we're going to come over to the layers panel, and now we can see we have some layer groups and all the layers underneath. We're going to select the top group, which is the highlights. I'm going to hold Shift and I'm going to select the solid at the bottom. So now I've got all the layers and the groups that form this object, this letter here. And I'm going to right click and duplicate layers and click OK. So now I've duplicated all those layers underneath and they're all selected, and with them all selected I'm going to press Command E, and that's going to merge all those layers together. So now I have a single layer above, and I'm going to call this Overlay 1, and I'm going to come up to my layer blending modes above, and I'm going to come down and click Overlay, and look what happens. It adds a sort of raging heat you'd expect from the neon lights. So if I just toggle the visibility of that, by using this as an overlay, we suddenly inject a nice bit of heat and light into this image. Now, if you think that the highlights on the outside stroke are a little bit intense, I can come back to the layer, the group underneath, and I can just toggle the opacity of these so they're not so intense. Let's toggle those a little bit. It's looking good. And maybe the one underneath, let's toggle that. It's looking a little bit less in your face now. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to duplicate the overlay 1. So I'm going to click on overlay 1 and duplicate the layer and call this overlay 2. And you can see that that is made another overlay effect, which is intensified it even more. I'm going to change this one on the top to 50% so it's not as intense. I'm just going to toggle the visibility of that, take that away for a second, because the final thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select the overlay 1 and I'm going to come up to filter and I'm going to come to distort. Is it distort? No, it's noise. That's the one. I'm going to come to noise. I'm going to add noise. And I'm going to add about 10%. I'm going to click OK. And let's undo that to show before and after. So before, after, I've added a bit of noise just to add a bit of grittiness, a bit of texture to that, so it doesn't look so artificial. Now it's got a bit more gritty texture. So I'm going to bring back the overlay on top, and that's just going to have a nice touch. So I'm going to finish off by selecting both of the overlay layers and pressing Command G to group them. I'm going to call this group Overlay. And with that, I'm going to select the top group, and by holding Shift, I'm going to select the bottom object again, the solid, but this time I'm going to press Command G and I'm going to group that, and I'm going to call that group L, because that is going to be our letter L. So I don't need to see the colors anymore. So here we have our letter L, and it's all contained neatly in one folder, layer folder. Alright then, so now I can, with the whole layer selected, or the group rather, I can move this item and drag it into my neon text composition. Just drop that in there, and there it is. And I can just drop this into place using our text comp as our guide there. And that is the first stage for our London typography. So we've got a little way to go, but that is the first letter. So now I'm going to create the next letter, the letter O. I'm going to use the same steps as demonstrated earlier, but this time I'm not going to go through them entirely. I'm going to speed up the process now and stop a few times along the way to explain one or two things. I'm going to begin by creating a new document, and this time I'm going to call this O, and we're going to make this document, like before, 8 centimeters by 12 centimeters and a resolution of 150. So, as you just saw, I applied the Photoshop filter to the object, as demonstrated earlier, to increase the boldness and create the outer stroke. But if we take a closer look here, let's toggle the visibility of the guides, we have a strange effect around here. It's not quite as smooth as I would have hoped. To rectify this, I will come to the menu and grab the eraser tool, and I'm just going to select a solid brush, and I'm going to push or toggle the brush size. I can do this easy using buttons on the keyboard, and I can find the right size brush and come to my stroke layer in the layers panel, and let's just smooth that out and give it a nice curve. And I can do the same for the above. And it's at this point that we're going to create the holes again, like we did previously. But instead of having to make those again, I can come back into my previous document with the L here, and I can come over to my layers panel, drop down, and I can find my folder here with the holes, and I can simply click on one of the layers and just press V to make sure I've got my move tool, and I can just click and drag this into my other document and just let that go, and here we've duplicated that hole. And if we make sure we position it correct, we should be able to just literally copy this. And for the clips, we can do the same again. We can come into our previous document, find the clips layer folder, click on any one and drag it into our new letter comp. And once we have completed all those steps, we will have our next letter ready to drag into our composition. So with the layer group selected, I am just going to drag this into our main composition, and I can put this in place. So now we have two letters. We have our L and we have our O. So let's come over to the layers panel a second, and if we look, we are going to need two O letters to spell out London. So I'm literally going to right click and duplicate group, and I'm going to call this, we're just going to name this O as well, and I'm going to drag this one over and place it in the correct position. So now we only have two letters left to complete the word London, the N and AD. I think by now you know the steps involved to create the effects on the text, so I'm going to skip ahead. So here we have our letter N, which I have just prepared, and my letter D. So with these now created, I'm going to drag these into my main composition, like so. And I can position this where appropriate. And again, we're going to need another one of these. If I come over to my layers panel and select on the D, or the N rather, I can right click and duplicate group. I'm just going to name that as N as well, and drag this into place. Just fine tune the positioning with my arrow keys. And if I come over to my D document, I can click and drag this into my composition and place this in place. So now we've got all the letters we need. So if I come over to my layers panel, I'm going to select on the top letter, and by holding shift I'm going to select on the bottom letter and just press Command G. I'm going to group these and call this group London. Call this London, so it's nice and clear. And if I want to, I might even want to just organize these in terms of their hierarchy. Doesn't really matter right now. I can come back to that later on. So let's take a little look at this. And I believe that's looking quite good. Let's zoom back in. And what I want to do next is add a drop shadow to all these letters. And I can do that really easily. I'm coming back to my layers panel. Let's just drop down this group we have here. And I'm going to select all of the characters, all of the groups by pressing on the top group and holding shift and select the bottom. And I'm going to right click and duplicate layers and click OK. And then I'm just going to press Command E to merge all the layers together. And I'm just going to drag this layer underneath all the rest. And I'm going to double click on this layer and I'm going to give it a color overlay of black. Okay. Then I'm going to come up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur. And we're going to give this a nice big Gaussian blur. So let's go for something like 20 pixels. Okay, and then just to intensify the darkness, I'm going to duplicate this layer again. Just duplicate it, and that's just going to give that a bit more depth. And I'm going to select these two layers, and I'm going to group them, and I'm going to call this shadow. And then I'm just going to move the shadow around with the arrow keys, or maybe pressing V, I can just move the shadow around. I'm just going to move it down slightly, zoom out a little bit, and get a look from out there. And yeah, with the drop shadow, it's looking great. And that concludes this part of the tutorial. Next, we are going to move on to the final part and add the effects to the neon text below. And we're going to start by coming back over to the layers panel and focusing on the text comp layer folder. And we're going to drop that down, and we're going to come to the layer calling the text layer, and I'm going to right click and duplicate this layer, and I'm just going to call this calling, and I'm going to right click and rasterize the type. I'm going to drag this layer, I'm just going to drag it out of the text comp layer folder there, and we don't need to see this anymore, so I'm just going to toggle the visibility of the text comp layer, and we're going to focus on our new layer. Now this text is going to have a classic neon light appearance, but at the moment it does not look that authentic. For example, the way some of the letters are joined together, well, I want to make it look like each letter is a separate strobe light emerging out of the brick wall behind. So before I start to apply some of the effects, I want to do a little work on the object. So first, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can have a little look at this a bit more closely. And I'm thinking this is looking a little bit thin at the moment. So I just want to make the line a bit bolder. So I can do that using the same technique I used earlier. I'm going to come to Filter, come down to Other, and I'm going to hit Minimum. And I'm going to change the radius to about 3. Okay, so that's just going to increase the boldness slightly. And then I'm going to come over to my menu and grab the eraser tool. And I'm going to grab an appropriate brush size. I'm going to make sure the opacity is 100%. I'm just going to delete some of the information here. I'm just going to delete the links from the text here. So as you can see, I've just got rid of all the the links, but now I'm just going to smooth the edges over. And at the moment it's looking a little rough, but that's not a problem because what I'm about to do next will fix this. Now I'm going to add some detail to the end of each letter to give the illusion the strobe light is emerging from the brick wall behind and protruding out. So I'm going to come over to my menu and select the brush tool, and I'm going to make sure I've got a white color selected, and I'm going to try and find, let's zoom in a little bit, I'm going to try and find a brush that has the same radius as the thickness of our line here. And this is going to take a little bit of trial and error, and it might need a few attempts at this. But what I want to do is just add a line and a swish, so it looks like it's coming out of the wall. Might want to press undo. I might want to try doing this a few times until I get it right. So then hopefully we'll have something that looks a little bit like this. But I'm just going to spend a little bit of time just to tidy up the edges because it's still looking a little bit rough. And after a little bit of tweaking and smoothing, we should be ready to start applying some of the strobe effects. Now, as I apply these effects, I'm going to be using certain colors, which I have predefined earlier. So if I just come back to my colors PSD and I come over to my layers panel, I can just drag in the right colors into my comp there, and I'll just position that there. This is going to be my reference. So I'm going to come back to my layers panel and just select my neon text there, which I'm about to apply all the effects, and I'm going to double click on the layer. I'm going to pull up my layer styles. And I'm going to start with a color overlay. So I'm going to click on the color overlay and make sure that is clearly selected. So I've got my properties here to the right. And I'm going to keep the blend mode to normal. And I'm going to just click on the color picker here. And I'm going to come across and I'm going to select my top color, which is that bluey color there. Okay, and I'm going to change the opacity to around 15% because we want it to be quite light there for the time being. Secondly, I'm going to come for a inner glow, and let's click there so we can edit the properties. And I'm going to change the blending mode to normal, and I'm going to keep the opacity at 75%. And I'm going to change the noise to 25%. And I'm going to click on the color picker here, and I'm going to select the same blue as earlier, so that bluey color on the top there. Okay, and I'm going to change the choke to around 28, and then I'm going to change the size to about 10, and now we can see this. We can see that we're beginning to get that sort of inner glow there. And I'm going to keep the range around 55 and change the jitter to around 33. Okay, and then I'm going to come over and add an outer glow. And I'm going to keep the blend mode to screen, and I'm going to change the opacity to around 40, and I'm going to change the color here to this darker shade of blue underneath for my reference. I'm going to change the size to about 50, and then keep the range at around 50, and click OK, and let's zoom in a little bit and see what we've got here. And that's looking alright so far, but we're going to need to add a few more effects just to give it a bit more bit more pizzazz and make it look a bit more authentic. Now, let's imagine these neon lights are coming out of the wall. They're going to shine a lot more of the blue light onto the bricks here. So I'm going to create some new layers on top of these bricks to give a sense of a reflective glow. And we can do this really easy. Allow me to demonstrate. So I'm going to come over to my layers panel, and I've got my calling text, neon text selected. I'm going to quickly duplicate this layer by right clicking and duplicating the layer. And what I've got is another layer with all the effects carried across from the one that I've just duplicated. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to convert this to Smart Object. And by doing that, it's just going to flatten the image now, flatten the object rather, so it doesn't have any of the effects applied. So then I'm going to come to Filter, and I'm going to come to Blur, and I'm going to hit Gaussian Blur, and I'm going to make it a nice, give it a good blur. So I'm going to hit something around 33 and really push that up. You can see what we've got there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up to my blending mode, but this time I'm going to choose Vivid Light, and you can see the effect that that has at that current instance, and that looks really strong. So if I come over to my layers panel, I'm just going to click the layer and just drag it underneath the neon text. So let me toggle the visibility and we can see the effect that has. So let's toggle the visibility. So that's before. So we've got the text with a subtle glow, but now when I bring this layer back, you can see that the bricks behind, there's a lot more of a more of intense sort of reflective blue glow. And if we really want to intensify this even further, we could simply duplicate this layer. And if I duplicate the layer, you can see that it'll really push up that glow, but I think that's a little bit much. But I do want to boost the original layer, so I could just change the opacity to something like 20%. So we've just got a little bit more there. And I'm just going to tidy this up. So I'm going to select these two glow layers and press Command G. I'm going to group these layers and just call this group Brick Glow. Now we don't need our color references anymore, so we can click on that color folder and let's get rid of those layers. And the next step, we are going to add some more detail to the neon text. This time we're going to create some rubber wall mounts to give the illusion that as the neon strobes are coming out of the brick wall, there are some rubber support mounts just on the brick wall there. Let me show you. So I'm going to press Command Shift N to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this Rubber Mount 1. Okay, and I'm going to come over to my menu and grab the circular marquee tool, and I'm just going to draw a small circle like so. I'm going to come over to my paint bucket, make sure I have a black color selected, and I'm going to fill that selection. I'm going to press Command D to deselect, and I'm going to come over to my layers panel and double click on this layer, and we're going to add again a series of effects here. So first we're going to come to bevel and emboss, and we're going to choose a emboss style, and we're going to go for a technique of smooth. We're going to keep the technique smooth, and the depth is going to be around 150. Let's go with around 150, and we want the direction to be up. Let's keep the direction up, and we're going to change the size to around 6. That'll do just fine. And we're going to change the highlight to like a blue, because the neon text is going to be reflecting onto this, so it's not going to be a perfectly white highlight. So we could maybe select a color from the neon text there. That'll do. Okay, and if I use the arrow keys on the keyboard, I can just move this mount around, this object around, and I'm going to come to my layers panel and just drag this layer underneath the top strobe light there. But we want it to be above the brick glow but underneath the neon text, and that'll do just fine. I'm going to double click on this layer again. I'm going to come back to my emboss effect. I'm going to change the opacity of the highlight Let's change the highlight, just bring that down a bit, just a bit more subtle, maybe to around 45, and that should do just fine. So now, once I'm happy with that rubber mount, I'm going to have to duplicate this a lot of times and reposition them on the rest of the text. I can do this quite easy. By holding Alt on the keyboard, I can just click with my mouse and drag. So holding Alt, I'm just going to click and drag, and you can see that I've quickly copied that layer. I'm just going to move that into place. I'm going to do the same by holding Alt on the keyboard. I'm going to click and drag, and I can leave go and then finely tune the position with my arrow keys on the keyboard. So I'm going to do this again, holding Alt. I'm going to click and drag and reposition this into place and move it. And I'm just going to quickly do this for the rest of the text. And once we have all our rubber mounts in place, we're going to end up with a lot of layers in our layers panel here. We're going to have a lot of duplicates. So I'm going to first select the top rubber mount. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom, and holding Shift, I'm going to select the bottom one to select all the layers, and I'm going to press Command G, and we're going to group that layer. I'm going to double click, and I'm going to name this layer folder Rubber Mounts. And then finally, the last thing we're going to do is come back to our layers panel and click on the neon text layer, and by holding Shift, we're going to select all the way down to Brick Glow, and we're going to right click and duplicate layers. I'm just going to click OK, and with them all selected, we're going to press Command E, and that's going to merge them all together. And then we're going to come to our blending mode, and we're going to select Overlay, and this is just going to inject a lot more light. But if you think that's a bit intense, we can just tweak the opacity. So we can use our own discretion here and just add a bit more light to it there. I'm going to double click this layer and just call it Overlay. And I'm going to finish off this part by selecting all the layers involved and Command G to group them. And I'm going to call this layer Calling. So we have the, if I just zoom out, we have the London text above in its own folder, and the calling text below, and the wall, all neatly contained within their layer folders. And that finishes this video tutorial. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video tutorial. If you did, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now. If you have not already, you can download the PDF worksheet. That has all the layer effects and download links for everything contained in this tutorial. If you're interested, you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook. All the links are on my YouTube channel homepage. So I hope to see you all there soon. So have fun, guys, and I will see you next time.